So hi there, and welcome to Tapping the West, Books and Beers with Scott Messenger and Friends. My name is Kate Gibson. I'm the manager of the Sprucewood branch of the Edmonton Public Library, and I lead Capital City Press, which is EPL's initiative to support and celebrate local writers. So with me today is Scott Messenger. Scott works for Nate as a communications specialist and an editor of Tech Life, their magazine. He's also senior editor and music columnist at 18 Bridges, and his work has appeared in The Guardian, Canadian Geographic, and newspapers across Canada. Scott's first book, Tapping the West, which is there, which we'll be talking about tonight, was recently published by Touchwood Editions. So thank you, Scott, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Also on the panel tonight, we have local brewers, Greg Zeschuk and Ben Ricks. Greg has been involved in the Alberta beer community for a while now. He created the YouTube channel Beer Diaries back in 2013, served as the first executive director of the Alberta Small Brewers Association, and then started Blind Enthusiasm, his own brewery, here in Edmonton, as well as a second brewery, The Monolith. Oh, and he also trained as a medical doctor, and he co-founded BioWare. Ben received his BA from the University of Alberta Augustana campus in environmental studies. During his time as a student, he began brewing beer at home, and after graduation, worked for Alley Cat Brewing. In 2014, he and three co-workers founded their own brewery, Bent Stick. So welcome you two.
Thank you.
All right. So to get us started, I think one of the most important questions of the evening, what is your favorite type of beer to drink or to brew? And if the people in the audience want to put in the chat comments their favorite beer to drink, I think we'd like to all hear that.
I'll start by just saying I really like Saisons. I will drink a Saison anytime. It's my favorite style beer. That's all I got.
Oh, go for it, Greg.
Yeah, so really quickly, I actually really, right now, it sort of changes all the time. I do like well-made hazy beers, both pale ales and IPAs. We make none of them, so it's kind of funny and ironic. But
I still love a good IPA and a stout, but right now we're having a lot of fun trying to brew good lagers and a lot of more sort of subtle balanced beers. And so we've been drinking a lot of those, and it's summertime. It's just nice to have a nice lager in the summertime. So.
Sure. So I'm seeing from the audience, there's lots of different sours, Saison, cream ales, Bent Stick Saison, Scott Messenger's homebrew.
I got somebody suckered.
Peter Bailey saying it's an impossible question for a beer nerd. Context is key, which, yeah, is probably true. Hefeweizen, lager, oh my goodness, wheat beer, sours. That's awesome. I like hazy IPAs myself. Maybe my palate isn't developed enough, but I can't stand sours. I'm sorry, everyone.
No.
That's just I know everyone's shaking their head. I went down to Oregon, Portland, and we went to one that just did sour beers, and I was like, can't do this. Although 10 years ago I couldn't even drink beer, so I'm growing as a person. All right, so that was a great start to the evening. Craft beer movement has grown massively this last decade and a half in Canada, and obviously in the last 7 years here in Alberta. I'm curious if you guys think, was it just the change in legislation that kind of kickstarted it all, or is there something else? Was there a cultural shift, people's tastes changing? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess that was the point. The book was intended to try to explore all those different factors that went into it. Myriad factors. Legislation was just a part of it with the changes that happened. I found that it was the people primarily. It was my book is entirely about the people of Alberta beer, and it tries to tell that story of Alberta beer through the people who are involved in it and through the people who wanted to see that industry thrive. And I think it's because of their passion and their creativity, ingenuity, maybe stubbornness at times, maybe a bit of craziness, all that really sort of helped to put the industry forward. But there are a lot of things too, other things were we have great barley, for instance. We have a very strong agricultural sector that feeds the beer industry, and it's homegrown stuff. It's the best in the world, right? And the other thing too is that there's a very strong desire for it. There's a sophisticated palate in Alberta for beer. And I think, like, you go on and on. I'm going to stop hogging it and pass it on to the other guys because there's just so many factors, right? But that's a start, I guess.
Yeah, I think the legislation change in 2013 is a really easy thing to point at. But I do also think that the Alberta sort of collective palate was ready for that shift. It was really the perfect timing. That legislation prevented breweries from starting small, but a lot of the breweries that started after that rule changed started with equipment bigger than Alley Cat. So it's not as if that rule was the only thing keeping people from starting breweries, but I think people wanting to support local and just the craft beer revolution was just starting to creep its way into Alberta right when that rule changed. So I think it's a little bit equal both parts.
I think for me, I just saw we had a huge opportunity. Like it was, I was trying to figure out what to do with myself, and I thought, okay, the beer business is really at that point. Like, when I started with the Brewers Association, there were like 9 breweries in the province, and like we're 4 million plus people. That's like an incredibly low number of breweries per person. So for me, it was just like, hey, it seemed like this great opportunity, and this was going to be an industry that was going to grow really well, and so that's how I went into it.
Yeah, I think another thing too that Ben touched on as well was the local factor, and I think, along with just there was a desire for, different types of beers like you were seeing, Greg, the local movement was picking up so much, the desire to support local producers. And I think craft beer was able to, excuse the pun, but tap into that pretty easily, just because that it had grown to that point. It just sort of dovetailed.
So yeah, as you say, Scott, you touched on a lot of this in your book. So what prompted you to write it? You did have the blog, but what made you think a book?
The blog was, I guess in a way it was the precursor to the book, although it's very far removed from the book in many ways, I guess. But the thing that the blog enabled me to do was to start getting acquainted with what was happening in Alberta beer, because I didn't know. I really had no idea at the time. And I just thought it would be fun. I saw this industry coming up. I saw a lot of new breweries coming out. I said, this would be fun just to explore this and just try to sample brews from all of these different brewers. And so I did that for a year, and I didn't actually get through them all. And there weren't that many at the time in relation to now. I think there was only like 40 to 45 or something when I was doing the blog. So, it was I should have been able to do it, if I could just go back. But anyway, what it did is it after the blog was done, I just got to thinking, as the industry kept growing, I got to thinking that it was still growing very fast, and I began to wonder why that was happening. I couldn't think of another industry that had really sort of taken off in the same way, in my lifetime anyway. So I thought it would be fun to try to explore that and then to capture it in a book, which I hadn't done before. I'd written a lot, magazines and stuff, but I hadn't tackled the book yet. So I thought maybe now is the time, and this might be the opportunity. So I gave it a shot.
So was in the writing of the book, was there anything that surprised you? Did you learn something that you were shocked about or had no idea? I mean, I think you said earlier you didn't really know the history of it.
Yeah, everything I learned was a surprise, which was really fun about the book, and the process of going through and actually writing it. I was asked that question recently by somebody else, and I think the biggest surprise for me was how natural, in a way, it was for this industry to become rooted in the province. And I think, one of the parts of the book that I think I maybe enjoyed writing the most, maybe, I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, I really liked it, was writing about the agricultural side of it and getting to understand that the roots of beer are really here in Alberta, because again, with the barley is part of it. Like that barley is the same stuff that gets shipped down to the United States and ends up in the best beers that are made in America at least, and famous beers that all craft beer nerds know. It's made with the barley that's grown like whatever 200 kilometers down the road or whatnot. And that impressed me. It impressed me that we had this essentially a natural resource that we could refine into something else, and that was beer. You can't drink bitumen. Beer's more fun. So I like that, and I also like the fact that it awakened other producers to the possibility of other ingredients. Like we're starting to see a local hops industry come up. I know Greg is familiar with that industry for sure, because he's used some of the hops in his beers. I'm not sure if Ben Stick has it or not. But I love this idea. I love this idea that there was this other opportunity that was spun out by this industry that came up, and other people could, find a new way into it, and improve their livelihood based on Alberta craft beer. So I like that. That was a nice surprise for me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading about the hops growers. I thought that was really interesting. I do have some in my backyard, probably not enough to do anything with, but I love the fact that that this is kind of the border of how far north you can grow hops. I didn't know that until I read it in your book, so that was
Two more
fascinating.
degrees north and no, nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
And my younger brother actually farms near Wetaskiwin,
Over there.
and he bought 100 rhizomes off Northern Girls about 4 years ago. And so we did pick a few this past fall and toss them in a fresh hop pale ale. But yeah, he actually got his hops from Northern Girls, who are in the book.
Fantastic.
Yeah, very
I'd like to get some too, actually.
Linda is asking, Scott, why are you drinking water?
Greg was bugging me about that already. I was saying the irony is that the guy who writes the beer book, it's not that I can't handle my beer, but I have enough trouble speaking sober, so I thought let's not complicate things.
So I want to give you a chance now, Scott, you've talked about some parts of the book that you found interesting, surprising, but is there a passage, a story that you'd like to share or read from, or maybe a story that didn't make it into the book that you'd like to share?
I will read something that's from the book, and I was thinking about how to be sort of brewery neutral in a sense. What I ended up doing was not really that. But I decided to maybe share the story that Neil Herbst told me about when he was getting going. And Neil, of course, is the founder of Alley Cat. And I thought that might be fun as well because of the connections that Ben would have to Alley Cat. And of course, Greg knows Neil from way back. I know that. So I thought that might be fun to share. I enjoyed talking to Neil very much. He's a gentleman and very open with his story. And so it was a privilege to be able to share it in the book. I'll just preface it by saying that there's a couple things here that people need to know. 3 things, not a couple. One is Ed McNally. Ed McNally is, of course, the founder of Big Rock. So that's the one thing. The other thing is I don't know how to say Neil Herbst's original partner's last name, Cholin, that's how we're going to say it. And the last one is there's a character who shows up in the last part of this section, and he is from the Sick Brewery. And the Sick Brewery, of course, is a brewery that dates way back to the early 20th century in Lethbridge. And they produced old-style Pilsner that, of course, all of our dads drank and still do, probably.
My grandpa drank that, and my grandma. I have
That's right.
vivid memories of that can.
So it's still all close to our hearts. It really is. And livers. Anyway, the section's called In Ed's Footsteps. The Ed McNally of Edmonton might be Neil Herbst, but one of Herbst's greatest regrets is that he never got the chance to sit down with McNally and have a beer. I wish I had, he told me over a pint of double IPA one chilly fall day at Alley Cat Brewing Company, Edmonton's oldest operating craft brewery. It was one of those things that we never got around to, which is too bad. We didn't have a whole lot to do with them, oddly, he added of Big Rock. But then who had the time? In 1995, as Big Rock was moving to a new facility and soon to go public, Alley Cat was just opening in a business park in South Edmonton, a few blocks from, from the massive Labatt Brewery, It was just Herbst and his business partner at the time, Richard Cholin, trying to fill what they saw as a gap. Craft was not new to Edmonton back then, but it was unfamiliar to most drinkers, and because of that, shaky as a business model. It would remain that way for nearly 2 decades to come, with Alley Cat outliving other local craft breweries who'd come and go. We thought there'd be room in a market, said Herbst. He'd taken a buyout from a job with the provincial government's apprenticeship training division and hoped to parlay his experience as an award-winning home brewer into something bigger. Flanagan and Sons, which had also operated on Edmonton's south side, was then the only craft brewery in town as Herbst and his partner were formulating their plan. We had an assumption that we could do better, he said. Early signs indicated that taking a crack at small batch brewing might not be that hard after all. Meeting the minimum brewing capacity, for one thing, turned out to be a matter of mathematics involving the 20 hectoliter system with which Alley Cat started out. Herbst recalled hearing that brewers in Calgary were often required by licensors at the Alberta Liquor Control Board to actually brew that minimum or better. It's a lot of beer. In his dealings with the authorities, he merely needed to prove that it could be done if they did so many brews each week. They were pretty easy going on it, he said. We fit the provincial requirements, but as far as actually making and selling 500,000 liters of beer in 12 months, it took us years to get there. That was not exactly what they expected. In our business plan, we were shoveling the money in after about 6 months, said Herbst with a laugh. In part, we didn't really know the market we were getting into. He and Cholin had looked at the thriving microbrewery scene along the American West Coast in British Columbia when they got down to committing their ambitions to paper. We assumed the uptake would be the same here. What we didn't realize is that Alberta didn't get as much of its influence from the West Coast as it did Central Canada. Central Canada, of course, was the birthplace of the likes of Molson and Labatt, both of which were kept busy in Edmonton with the relentless task of meeting the demand for easy drinking lagers. Herbst recalled Alley Cat's first hop forward offering, its flagship Full Moon Pale Ale, was brewed on contract for a now defunct Edmonton brew pub called Taps. He and Cholin liked it so much, they decided to brew it for themselves as well. But their appreciation for it was not widely shared. When we came out with Full Moon, it was 35 IBUs, it's international bittering units. And people were like, oh, that's, instead of finishing a sentence, Herbst makes a face as if he just smelled something bad. To compare, a bottle of Labatt's Blue doesn't crack about 10 IBUs. Even a tame wheat beer was among Alley Cat's offerings. Even a tame wheat beer that was among Alley Cat's offerings was at times met with consternation or confusion. We thought people would understand what it was, but often we'd get it back, said Herbst. People would say it's cloudy, there's something wrong with it. It's a bit of a slog. As a result, the brewery took on the role of both educator and heretic. When we started off, we assumed that if you brewed it, people would buy it. You realize that no, you have to go out and sell it. You have to educate people, and you have to make sure your beer is top notch. For about 3 years after it started, Alley Cat made no money, Herbst said. Around that time, his wife, Yvonne, bought out Cholin. She put her MBA to work on business building while Herbst kept the tanks full. We figured out how to exist in that sort of market at relatively low volumes. It's not like we were packing mattresses full of cash. It wasn't super profitable, but we could make a living at it. But even before the craft beer boom, you could see the market moving a bit, he added. That and doggedness kept him in it. Alley Cat has grown steadily ever since. That's measured in single-digit percentages these days. That's fine by Herbst. Alley Cat will never likely be another Big Rock in terms of size. That was never the plan anyway. Too much growth, he said, would have meant too much strain on employees and on him and Yvonne. In that sense, it has remained manageable. Now in his 60s, Herbst, known by many in the industry as the Hop Father, says he has no immediate plans for retirement. People might be laughing at that, I'll tell you after. He doesn't do the brewing at Alley Cat anymore, but he still shapes the product in the direction of the company by working on recipes on his brewing system at home. I've gone full circle, he said. Herbst may not have had the pleasure of a beer with Ed McNally, but he considers McNally to have been instrumental in establishing the craft beer industry we know today. And even if Herbst did his fair share of educating consumers and likely laying the groundwork upon which new brewers can more easily build today in the post-2013 era of craft beer, he never speaks of himself or of Alley Cat as having a significant impact on the industry today. Herbst did, however, have an auspicious meeting with another of the founders of Alberta beer industry. As he was preparing to open Alley Cat in the mid-90s, Bob Blair, who married into and worked for the Sick family, stopped in to see how the brewery was coming along. He brought us a bouquet of flowers in an old original six beer glass, a ceramic beer glass, with a note, said Herbst. And here I asked him what exactly he meant, but the note said, "May you be half as successful as the Sick family." I didn't know whether it was a curse, said Herbst with a smile. He was a pretty funny guy. That's it. The funny part of that is that, of course, Neil sold the brewery. He told me, or what I've learned is they didn't know at the time when we were doing this interview and that sort of thing. But anyway, since then he's sold to a couple of new entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs. Anyway, thanks for that. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you. So Greg and Ben, Greg, you went to school to become a medical doctor, and Ben, you took environmental studies. I'm curious, when you were crossing that stage with the cap and gown, your diplomas, were you thinking of brewery? Is that like your end goal? Was that your end game always, or did this come on gradually? Was it luck? Was it fate? I'm just curious how you got into this.
You want to go first, Ben, or I can? Or...
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, no, so for me, like I have had multiple career changes. And so, first medical, and I didn't really think I was going to go into video games, but then I kind of became passionate about technology and medicine, but that was not really an avenue then. And then it was actually I was living in Austin, Texas, making one of our games there, and I was running a studio, and Austin was actually going through their, very similar but earlier dated craft boom. And I was traveling back and forth. There were a bunch of us that were from out of town, so we had nothing to do after work. So we not really a good hobby, but we'd visit breweries and bars, and it's actually a good hobby. We have to be careful. And so I got to know actually a lot of the people there and saw the industry, and that actually led to my Beer Diaries show. And then during the Beer Diaries, I was like, I wasn't actually intending to make beer. Like I said, I'll just do this, and kind of I wasn't sure what I was going to do with myself. I knew I was leaving the games business, but then one of the episodes, a brewery called Funkworks in Colorado, I was the two owners, one was an accountant, one was an engineer who both designed bike frames. They're both like, yeah, we didn't need to do this, but then one day we said, why not? Let's go for it. And so I kind of like, for whatever reason, just that moment, I got inspired to go, well, I could do it too. It's funny. I always tell the story. It's not like I think I could do as well as them, because the one guy, Gordon, already had like the American National Head Home Brewing Award for Saisons like 3 or 4 times, and they're now reputed for that. But more so just just taking one more leap. And for me, it was just like, I needed to do something, and beer seemed fun. It was a passion. Like I did definitely enjoy it. So it was, not something that was initially started, but kind of along the way. And then, now that's kind of what I do for the next decade or two. We'll see. Right. So that's it for me.
Ben?
Yeah, nice. I'm trying to think. So I went to school at Augustana in Camrose, sort of a satellite campus of the U of A. And all I was really interested in when I was 18 was snowboarding. And I thought, if I take environmental studies, I bet I could work in a national park or something, go snowboarding all the time. So I ended up sitting in a truck up north, like a lot of folks do in Alberta. All those sweet gigs in the national parks are pretty nailed down, it turned out. And I was getting really into homebrewing at the time, just through being a low funds university student. My brother and I, we were walking through Superstore one day, and we saw those syrup cans of malt extract, and we were like, oh, you can make beer in your basement? And so we made some pretty awful beer, and then that just leads you to reading about how to make beer that's less awful, and it's just a really fun hobby. And so yeah, I went to school not intending to be a brewer, but I had another job for a while, and I was just mostly, anytime I was home brewing just feverishly, and got a job at Alley Cat when I could. And when the laws changed, we didn't exactly mutiny Alley Cat to start this brewery. We all kind of went our separate ways. I was living in Camrose at the time, as I was sort of working as a support worker for folks with disabilities. And Scott and Patrick and Curtis came and visited me in Camrose and said, we need a fourth guy. And we knew we'd worked at Alley Cat together, so we knew that we could probably make beer together. And now I'm here, sitting in front of this wall of kegs.
That explains it.
Yeah.
So what was it like actually starting up? Like, Greg, you obviously you'd helped co-found a business before, BioWare, and I'm just curious, like, what was that whole process like?
It was interesting because I think it was like, I kind of felt I had a really good handle on kind of the business model and how we would move forward and that sort of thing, kind of having been in business. But then, you know, when you actually get into it, it's different. And then now, you know, like this, hey, guess what, since mid-March, very different. So it's actually, like, it's never easy, but it's a pretty interesting industry. And the best part is the people. Like, you know, I really love working with all the other breweries in the province. Like, we do really, like, it's so cliche to say we're all pals and we'll all help each other out, but we really will.
Ben, what was it like for you starting this up and that whole experience?
Yeah, it was hard, it turns out.
What?
Yeah, we were thinking, we can, if we start small, we can make whatever beers we want to, anytime we want. And so our story is we were all four brewers when we started and none of us business people. And being a very small brewery, we were brewing a different beer every batch and approaching bars, and we'd say, we have this. I remember it was the Crusher and ISA, and we're like, could you put it on tap? And they did, and they said, it sold great, people loved it, we'll take 4 more kegs. And we'd have to say, actually, we've brewed 6 new beers since then, and here's samples of all those ones. And that was just one of our early lessons on, that's why breweries have core products, especially if you're not just a brew pub. You need something that someone who's not as excited to try so many beers as you can print on their menu and make reorders. So it's been a learning curve.
So one of the things I love about both of your breweries is the logos that you have. Most people hopefully probably know what those look like, but if you don't, I do have, these are empty bottles, I'm sorry. There is Blind Enthusiasm's almost Masonic looking eyeball. I don't know if you can see it, the one. And I do have one of Bent Sticks with their wizard and the, what is that thing called? The mash paddle. So those are very distinctive logos, and I'm just curious, what was the process like? Like, obviously your logo is a thing that people think of, so what was that process coming up with those like?
On the bottle there, that was Jeff the Wizard. That's what I'm drinking too. My partner is very luckily a graphic designer. Her name's Jenna, and so she works at the University of Alberta. When I give tours, I often say it's the best Tinder swipe I ever made. It's paid off in spades, and that's usually my best joke of the tour. But Jenna sort of had a meeting with us and said, "What's your vision for the brand?" And at that time, we were just drinking beers, and we were saying, "Well, our vision for the company, the only thing we figured out so far is we want to have a delivery van with a big airbrushed sort of 80s wizard on it." And she said, "Well, potions, alchemy, that's kind of like brewing, and I think the wizard could really work for a brewery." And so next morning we woke up and we'd gone full wizard. Sometimes people are surprised that we aren't a little bit more maybe fantasy themed with the names and sort of the motif of the brewery, but that's the story of the logo. And he's got a mash paddle that's used for stirring the grain in a mash. That's that part in his hand there, and that's the pint of beer.
Very cool. Greg.
For us, I worked at a company called Paper Leaf, and I was approaching it kind of like maybe a formalized design project. And I think a lot of stuff when I work with folks, I usually pick them because they're really good at what they do, and I don't try and direct them too much. And I knew the name was going to be Blind Enthusiasm. And it's really funny. One friend of mine said, "You should never have the word blind in an alcohol company because that's just a bad association." And I'm like, oh, that's probably true, but whatever. And so I kind of like let them just run with it. Say, hey, wine enthusiasm is the name. What would you do for a logo? And I think being ultimately practical, like they thought about what could fit on a cap and what reads well, different sizes, similar. So they came up with the eye, and then we kind of went with it. And it's like, yeah, it's like, and I think, I think the interesting thing is like, when you think of branding, I mean, obviously, between us and Blind Man has actually historically been some level of confusion. We've been actually really good. We've chatted early. That's, and ironically, we even work in some of the same spaces with some of the barrel-aged, barrel-fermented stuff. But I just, we kind of felt, we'll be different enough, and folks will figure it out.
So you mentioned this earlier. Obviously, this current crisis has changed everything for everyone. If you can't tell, I'm working out of my home. I'm not at a library. But I'm just curious, how have your breweries adapted to this?
Well, first off, we had a full-on, sit-down restaurant, so that got shut down immediately. And I think for us that was really challenging because most of our business was draft, and most of it was through the restaurant, and whatever wasn't through the restaurant was through a bunch of like bars and other restaurants in Edmonton, which also got shut down. So we kind of like, fortunately, had our monolith bottle sales and some of the market bottle sales starting to move, but that was like 10% of our sales. So we've had to quickly pivot to packaging. And we did a beer box, we're doing beer delivery. I think what we've all generally seen is delivery is quite good. Like there's a real business there. We all had to, I always say it's like number 14 on the list was to get a website where you could buy beer and deliver it. Like it was always low priority, and now everyone's got one. And it's a lot of work. Like, people, like I do some of the deliveries, like usually the Fridays I'm on the team doing deliveries, and it's funny, sometimes people get surprised I show up selling them beer or giving them beer, but it's part of the, it's a tough gig. It's you see parts of Edmonton you didn't know existed. Like that's the other fun one. Like it's really kind of bizarre. I'm like, I didn't know the street was here. It's pretty cool. But like, yeah, you just, and I mean, we're shifting slowly back. Like we're going to start doing takeout next week, and then we'll kind of probably reopen. But I mean, very much like Ben said, it's not just the 50%, but also 2 meter rule. So, 2 meters, like most restaurants aren't even getting to 50%. Like I think we're at about 40, 45. So, and that makes, it's a very hard business to begin with. So the beer business will kind of keep us chugging pretty happily, but the restaurant business, I think, is the more challenged side. And any of the hospitality taproom stuff is going to be really tough if it's not mainly a to-go play.
Mm-hmm. Ben, how's it been for Bentstick?
Yeah, we've been saying that we've kind of turned into a logistics company overnight. So the online orders thing was huge, especially when the messaging was stay home, stay home, stay home. Everybody was very supportive. It was really scary when all the bars and restaurants closed, but people just started drinking at home, it turned out. And there was a lot of messaging about how, support local more than ever. And we really saw people take that to heart. And we were very busy with deliveries, and it was wonderful. And I couldn't help but laugh when Greg was talking about seeing parts of Edmonton you'd never seen before. And I've kind of enjoyed doing deliveries because, yeah, I've been to some really neat parts of town that I'd never been to before. And it's also fun sort of being the beer fairy, dropping on someone's doorstep, and maybe they're staying behind their screen door and sort of waving at you, and they're excited to see somebody and for the beer. And it's actually, I've really enjoyed doing deliveries actually. And now that people are leaving their homes a little bit more, that's slowed down quite a bit, but we're seeing lots of beer move through stores. And it's a shame that I always love the experience of pouring people samples and trying to share my enthusiasm about the beers we make. And so we can't do that anymore, but we've tried to do some beer tastings of new beers sort of on like Instagram Live or one of those platforms. And so it's kind of like this, and people comment, and that's kind of fun too. So it's been a change, and we thought it could be disastrous, but everybody's been really supportive. So thanks everybody.
I think just to touch on what Ben said, I think actually one of the really huge positive that's going to come out of all this is a true appreciation and focus on local breweries, restaurants, otherwise. Like I think historically there's been a lot of lip service to it, saying, hey, we got local ingredients. When you ask someone, okay, where are they from, which farm, where exactly did you get them? And like, oh, they're from Cisco. They just rolled in on a truck. I don't know, but they said it's local. But I think what's happened now, I think really people are actually paying real attention to it. And I think we're actually, if you're the brewery in their neighborhood, like, a lot of our brewery deliveries are very, very short distance from where the brewery is. And so it's exciting. I mean, this is normal business. I've been through lots of personal business cycles, and stuff goes sideways all the time. And this is the biggest sideways I think we've all faced in our lifetimes for business. But it's funny because we're all going to have delivery platforms after this. I mean, we're going to probably keep it going maybe just once a week or something, but it's probably not going to go away, and it's going to allow us to reach more customers. So it's kind of a net positive, I think, ultimately.
So I don't want to take up too much time, but I wanted to give you all a chance to talk about tips for starting out. I'm sure a lot of people are curious, either starting out just home brewing, starting out a brewery, or starting out writing. Is there anything you want to, like, top tips for people to impart right now?
Well, I can jump in a little on that one. I mean, biggest thing is, like, be realistic about what you're trying to be in the end. Like if you're saying, hey, we're going to be the next big rock and we'll do like 200,000 hex, unless you're, incredibly well financed, have access to like all kinds of things. Like, I think a real strong position going forward to get into the business is to like be a really small local neighborhood place. I mean, Ben can talk to us, one of the challenges of that is there's a certain scale requirement to make money, and depending on how the business is structured, how many partners, and their cost base. But like, starting small and kind of like, the building your way up by having good product and good sales and good processes is probably the only way to do it going forward. Because I mean, the competition is stiff, but I think there's still gonna be opportunity for people that do a good job. It's a classic sort of thing. If they serve some need that isn't getting met, it can happen.
Yeah, start small. I think there's a lot of folks who got into being regional breweries when that door was sort of closing, and they're well established, but being small and serving your community is definitely the way to do it these days. And yeah, putting beer, we were just a packaging brewery, and we didn't get licensing to serve people beers, and we just wanted to manufacture. We wanted to make beer, go home for the weekend, and send it to liquor stores. But it turns out the money is in the pints. So definitely now, being a small brewery with an established hospitality system would be the way to go if you're thinking about doing it. And home brewing, if you're looking to get into home brewing, I think I saw Chelsea is in here somewhere. I haven't figured out the grid thing, but I think I saw her name, and she's part of the Edmonton Homebrewers Guild. And Edmonton has a really great active homebrewing community. They meet at the Alley Cat Tap Room first Monday of the month in the wintertime. They take the summer off, but they would love to have new folks, and it's a very informal, fun, sample each other's wares sort of meeting. So start homebrewing first, and if you love it, start a little brewery.
So before I turn it over to the audience for questions, I have a question for you guys. I didn't send you in advance. So this is just off the cuff, but if you, Greg and Ben, if you had to pair one of your beers with Scott's book, what beer should people drink while they're reading his book?
I'm trying to think of which one of our beers is the most expensive.
I think our first beer, it's a Helles called Fabulous, named after the German. And the reason is I think what I really loved about the book, and I've mentioned to Scott earlier, was that it's a really neat story. I mean, there's some really tremendous historical stuff, which I had learned a bunch of neat things. But then it's a really cool story of like 2012 to now. And I think, so a beer that was, for us at least, one of our formative beers is one that I would choose. Just because it's kind of like, for us, it's a really important slice of time. It was like our first commercial brew we actually put on sale. I shouldn't say that. First one we brewed, it was probably the third on sale. It's a lager, so it took longer. But yeah, and I mean, like the book for me was really interesting. Just to knowing almost literally everyone in it was really neat to sort of see how it was put together and read it. So Fabulous. That's what I think it was.
Yeah, I'd say for us, in Scott's book, he does a great job of describing the beers he's drinking. And in the part where he visits our brewery, the only thing we had on tap at the time was our wit beer. But he's really good at describing what he's tasting. So I guess if you get your hands on our wit beer, you can kind of compare notes to what Scott's tasting and be part of the story.
I'm shocked to hear you say that. I think I just have no sense of flavor at all. So this is the thing. You know, I can't drink much beer and I can't taste it either. So what's the point? What am I doing here? No, but I do like that. That's kind. That's good beer though.
Scott, will you be doing a brewery tour to promote the book this summer?
I don't think so. I'd love to be able to do something live with a whole group of people who helped for sure to make the book possible in so many ways. Like the brewers, like so many people gave so much of their time and their insight to make this book happen. It is just, you know, maybe now's the chance to just say thank you to everybody who did. And then of course there's all the people who supported, you know, family and friends and everything like that. You know, and to be able to get them all into a room would be a wonderful thing. I don't think we'll be able to do that for a little while, but maybe we will one day.
One day. Another question, what does a community have to support a brewery? And what is Millwoods missing?
Maybe the right space. Like, I don't know. I mean, that's a funny one. Like, I don't know. I mean, you're really just missing someone that wants to do one there. Like it probably would work out really well. Like, and it probably would be greatly successful. But I mean, someone said the same thing about Sherwood Park. Like, why does Sherwood Park not have a brewery? And I mean, I'd heard, I mean, maybe they have one now and someone was possibly doing one. So I think it's a funny one. Like, just someone to sort of think, actually, it is a good idea, and they find the right space they want to do. And they could probably pull it off, I think. I don't know.
Scott, were you influenced by the book Beer Quest West by John C. Scott?
Yeah, I did read that book. I was influenced by it not only, but particularly by the fact that it needed updating. You know, I've never met John. I think did a great job with that book, and obviously it was time to try to fill it in. I guess the gaps that had appeared, which was a lot. But the other thing too, maybe that I'll just say is, you know, that was largely a guide. And when I did pitch the book to my publisher, I said we shouldn't do a guide. And the reason I said that is because, well, there's the internet. And also because there is a guide. There's a craft beer guide, Alberta craft beer guide that's produced quarterly, I think, here in the province. So we didn't need another one. We needed something a little bit different, and we needed something that told the story of individual brewers the way that John Stott did, but then also made an attempt to try to tell a bit of a more holistic story about the industry. So that was, I guess, the relationship to that book.
A question for Greg. Can you talk about the creation of Lambic Beer?
So Lambic Beer, it's interesting. So one thing we always talk about, we don't refer to our beer as Lambic just because it kind of refers to the geography, but the processes are very similar. Like you know, so what we do at the Monolith is very similar. We use 50% barley and unmalted wheat, so wheat that's been not malted at all. So it's very, very proteinaceous. We do a turbid mash, which is about a 3.5 hour to 4 hour boil, and then we kind of like move and during the process kind of like move the actual liquid out and in, and it's about multi-step liquid decoction mash, very complex. And what we're trying to do is get a really sort of proteinaceous and complex wort out of it. So the thing with brewing is like there's sort of very different philosophies, very different techniques. You can get to different things. Your typical approach is, how can we get the fastest to a good quality wort that will ferment quickly and give us a great beer? Lambic is the complete antithesis of that. It's like you do everything opposite and cause yourself incredible headaches. And, you know, ideally the process is great in the end. So, you know, the wort making process creates a very complex wort because you want it to actually be fermentable for over a year. You know, like we actually, We have beer fermenting in barrel that's a year old, that's still changing. Different bugs are stepping up. We've done we've done sort of studies with U of A that we're actually publishing. Have a in-house, we have another grant that we got. There's the sort of PhD graduates now in-house at Monolith doing research in conjunction with one of the fermentation labs. There's a sort of a food science lab that we're doing stuff with. So we're actually going to try and quantify what actually happens in the process. Once we've made the wort, we throw it up. So the true lambic approach, we mimic this as well. We put it up in a cool ship, which is a large vessel on the 3rd floor of the Monolith. One day we'll be able to do tours of this again. On the 3rd floor of the Monolith, we have like automated louvers that open that we can actually control with a computer program. So what we've tried to do is take the traditional lambic approach and make it more scientific. They typically actually don't like check gravities, check pHs during the process. Doug, my head brewer, worked at Cantillon, and none of the guys do that. They just make it and throw it in the cool ship and it works. But we've actually tried to quantify it in a lot of ways. And when it sits in the cool ship, we bring it in about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and it stays in there till about 9 in the morning, drops from about 93 Celsius down to about 18 Celsius. Then we pump it downstairs into a holding tank. We sort of circulate it because it's kind of sort of layered up. Stratified, that's what we're looking for. And then we put it into barrels immediately, right into wood, and sits there for, like, we're finding usually about minimum a year, year and a half. I mean, for lambic, the earliest realistically, the Belgians like take it out about 18 months. You can get fresh young lambic if you go to the breweries in these kind of earthenware jugs. I always, when I go there, call it the morning lambic. You have your lambic for breakfast. It's almost a really lemony, really light kind of beer. But I mean, to get the complexity, you get to 2 or 3 year time frame. So it's a really, really long process. And then one of the keys to all of it, how we make the beers we make, it's about blending. So right now at the Monolith, we've got, I think, about 300 barrels, and they're actually like between 350 liter to 500 liters. So if you make that into 20 liter or 200 liter barrels, which is your typical wine barrel size, we've got about 650 barrels or something. So we're at about 2/3 capacity. So when we actually, Doug and I will taste barrels, and he'll say, we'll mix this with this with this. We take it to the lab. We do like a little bit of analysis, blend it, try different blends, try it and go, yeah, that's what we want. Take that all out, put it into a holding tank, and then package it. Add a little bit of sugar to the packaging, no additional bugs. So we let the bugs that are still live, because they're still live in it after years, to restart fermentation and finish it. And it's a really long process. Like the bottle conditioning process for a lot of our beers takes more than 6 months if it's a really complex bug mixture. So it's just super slow. And it's like, when we do our releases, like we've actually probably had the beer start to finish almost 2 years minimum. And that's like, substantially complete. It was in bottle for 7 months before we released it. And I've got like 3 or 4 beers right now. Like the limiting factor is us being not lazy and getting our labels done. We've got like 4 beers that are ready. We're doing some labels this week, and then we've got new labels coming next week. So we've got a bunch of beers, but it's just a very, it's a real long answer, but it's a really complex system. But it's a really bad business model until it's actually up and running, and it's like a winery or distillery. Like once you've got regular batches, and we've been doing it about 2.5 years actually brewing, and we had this horrible realization that we've got dozens, like no joke, dozens of batches going to be ready this fall, and we're like, oh my god, the amount of packaging we're gonna have to do, because we hand bottle everything is like, and then blending and packaging. It's gonna be great fun, but it's gonna be like a lot of work, which is cool because we'll have a bunch of beer, and then the plan was to open the Monolith tap room, because we have a tap room we're building there. Very similar, I think, to the bent stick philosophy. Like you could put 20, 25 people in there, but when you socially distance 2 meters, you can put like 3 people in there. Like no joke, it's like it's no point opening it until, and so we're gonna build it and get it ready. We can maybe run our patio, but it's these beers will see the light of day probably via direct delivery for a while in stores and stuff. So that's kind of the long process. And yeah, the Lambic beers, it's a really neat process. It's so traditional how they do it in Belgium. It's kind of cool. So
I'm going to jump to the question that just came in. Is there Ritchie Mill Creek wild yeast in Monolith beer?
Sure, absolutely. There's something like, none of the ones have been released yet. We have one yeast that we harvested from Olds, Doug, when he was at school. But the spontaneous beers, the ones that use air cooling. Yeah, there's yeast from all, probably, there's a lot of, Edmonton's really green. So it's like, especially spring with flowers and stuff. Like we actually just did a natural beer. We took a bunch of lilacs and apple blossoms and chucked them in this spontaneous. That was actually like Tuesday night. We did that. We didn't really promote it at all. We'll see what turns out. But that's actually a common way you do it as well, is take flowers, just throw them right in the beer, and had the spontaneous louvers open, and we'll see what comes out. Hopefully something drinkable. But yeah, there's definitely like in the spontaneous beers, it'll be like yeast and bacteria from Edmonton for sure.
I think you
That's so
answered.
cool. It's like we've all been sitting around playing checkers, and for 2 years, Doug's been somewhere playing 3D chess. And now all of a sudden it's just coming out into the world. And yeah, no, it's pretty exciting and fun stuff to see and taste.
Well, I think what's fun is like it's local. It's going to be an Edmonton version of what like people have had for like, Lambic's not super old. It's like actually like 1905 or so. So like for 120, 130 years, I mean, we'll have our own variation on it, and it's going to be different, and it's going to be our own thing. And it's neat that it's a really, again, truly local product. We actually use all Alberta wheat in that one, which is fun. We get from Red Shed. The malt, we need a really, really light Pilsner style malt. We're still trying to get people to do it locally, but they haven't done it yet. But we've been trying to talk to a lot of the local maltsters about that. But hopefully we can get a full, true Alberta start to finish. One day, I'm sure.
Question for Scott: what is your next project? Are you working on another book?
No. I don't know. I don't know yet. I thought I should try to stick with this one for a little while and see if I could get people to read it. And if I can, then I would like to start another project. I don't know if it would be about beer again. I don't think of myself actually as a beer writer. I'm a writer who ended up covering beer for a book, but I sure love writing and I sure love beer. So bringing those two things together is not a bad thing for me. So I don't know yet. Stay tuned. Sorry, this is a terrible cliche. There's tons of them in the book.
Well, if that's it, then I'm going to thank you all for coming. It really has been a great turnout. I had no idea when I put this out there. This is all new to us at the library too, doing these Zoom workshops and panels and all sorts of things. So we're still figuring everything out. I'm hoping we can do more of this type of thing. I'm brainstorming ideas of bringing together like writers and musicians and artists, business people in the community, influencers, and having more of these panel discussions online. So wait and see about that. Just a reminder that EPL has lots of online resources for everyone during this time. You can visit our website at epl.ca and check out our EPL from Home section. We've got summer reads and summer starts at EPL, the summer reading club for kids coming up. That is June 15th. So if you have kids or if you just want to do a summer reading club for yourself, check that out. Scott, aside from the library where you can put a hold on your ebook version of that, there is lots of holds. Where can people get your book?
I think a lot of people have been getting it online from the places where you buy books online. I know it'd be great to support the local bookshop, Audrey's. I don't know if they still have copies or not. Oddly enough, I'll throw this one out there too. I know that London Drugs and Save on Foods actually had copies as well. So it's out there. You can get it if you'd like to read it. So. All
right. So aside from getting the book, don't forget to check out Blind Enthusiasm and Bent Stick Breweries. So thank you to Scott, Greg, and Ben for a wonderful evening. And again, thank you all for coming. Stay safe and have a great evening. We'll see you all later.
Summer Starts at EPL is here from June 19th to August 29th. All throughout the summer, kids will read, participate in fun activities, and win prizes. But don't feel left out, grown-ups. We have a summer reading program for you, too. Summer Reads is our adult version. There's something for readers of all ages this summer at EPL.